Very good morning. I'm very grateful to be here with all of you, at least at this online event. I hope it would have been a real event in the next session, in-person only event. In this online event, I'm very happy to have our Italian partner from University of Milan and the Indian partners from IIT Madras and IIT Hyderabad who will just follow me after this talk. And the whole story starts with how we think we created a small network that's going to do something different. A network that's supposed to help students, network that is supposed to help researchers, and a network that's supposed to generate something innovative. The idea started off when Government of India, Department of Science and Technology in Delhi, and the Ministry of External Affairs, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation in Italy, MFA, Farnesina, called for an executive program where they funded us previously for an Indo-Italy travel project, or travel-only funding research project. And when we started thinking about how complex brain functions are, and this was the goal of saying, if we put at least a few partners to work together, can we create a platform that would make sense? Typically, we are talking about ideas such as connecting different circuits of the brain, different functions of the brain, and interpreting how these kind of functions work. And our tool of approaching this problem was looking at what is called computational neuroscience, or mathematical modeling of the brain. The project as itself, this being the first symposium of the project, this project started with the coordinator Giovanni Naldi from Milan and us taking off by saying we'll have to work together to build platforms that will solve problems that are of common interest. The idea was very, very direct. We take the experiments that have been happening for years, many years across all the labs, and we develop models that are also being is a continuous work that is happening over the years. And from models, we want to go to phenomena, which means that we want to understand how certain functions and dysfunctions of the brain completely change the way we perceive or we look at how certain circuit or certain functions that we perform will be operated on. This is critical for us to do two things, at least for the for the Bharatiya mindset. You would say Indians would love to work with algorithms and also to look at solving society problems, which is one of AMRITA's missions as well. So as every researcher would do, we started asking us two questions. One, when we develop these models, do we look at neuroscience alone or models of neuroscience that explain functions in neuroscience, which is also a critical point of interest. The second one is how does the brain answer these questions? How does it work as an AI system? So we also believe that human in the loop, data-driven human in the loop AI is going to be a game changer. And that's exactly what we see in what's happening across different problems of interest. And this is where we think prosthetic devices and neuromorphic platforms can be of much further use. As I said, we were six individuals working together, thinking about it. There was Giovanni Naldi from University of Milan, Egidio D'Angelo from University of Pavia, Jonathan Mappelli from University of Modena and Emilia Romagna, and we had Srinivas Chakravarti from IIT Madras and Mohan Raghavan from IIT Hyderabad, along with me, sitting together and saying, how do we connect people together? And this was the goal of this project. Not just putting ideas together, but also to connect people together, which means students from different groups can sit together and understand and work. And fortunately, this is what we call today as multi-scale brain function India-Italy network of excellence. MSBFIINE is a network project funded by Department of Science and Technology in Government of for the Indian side and Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, the Italian side, where a bunch of PhD students, let's say one per lab in India and one in Italy, will be working alongside the PIs with others to build problems of mutual interest. We had three objectives when we wrote the proposal. One is to look at how biomedical sciences or how central nervous system can be abstracted, which means that every neural circuit can be made into probably a functional algorithm or usable algorithm, a simpler version of understanding how the brain functions, reverse engineering the brain. The second question was much more specific. If I talk about how these model circuits, whether it's spinal cord or the cerebellum or the basal ganglia, how do they perform functions like sensory motor control? So we, in this project, we look at two specific objectives. Specifically, one, we are looking at how the brain interprets implements a wide variety of perceptual, cognitive, motor tasks. And the second one is a computational design based on the algorithm of how these kind of circuits function, or circuits actually provide some kind of solution to models. With that as a goal, you can say that this is not an old new goal. It's been there for years together. If you look at classical frameworks way back in the 1960s, 1950s, people have asked the question, when there are thousands or millions of neurons involved for a very tiny task like moving a hand, should we account for all the behaviors that we see in such neurons? The second one that we talk about is, do these neurons, the number of neurons, do they add problems that we can't explain? Like I said, if you look at early models of vestibular processing, sensory coding of self motion, any kind of multimodal integration, all these models have already answered questions like this that are critical also for sensory motor control. So we were not very tackling very different questions. What we were tackling is, how do we club what we already know, especially if you look at it from a machine learning perspective. If I have a bunch of circuits, our goal is to understand why certain learning happens in certain circuits. And if you look at it, cerebellum, for example, is a very old part of the brain. And as of today, compared to what we knew 30 years ago, we know there are 16 known forms of plasticity, or 16 types of learning that happen in these kind of circuits. This is a critical, very basic function that we think is needs to be understood in a better way. But if you put cerebellum and interconnected circuits such as the cortex, the thalamus, the basal ganglia, and other parts of the circuits as well, you get a whole different bunch of problems and questions that one needs to tackle. That's the goal of MSB Fine. The real project's goal is to see if I can put people that are working differently together, what kind of answers are we going to come up with? This is not unusual. This is what Human Brain Project, India's Cognitive Science Research Initiative, US's Brain Initiative have been trying and are still trying, but the answers that we look at is at a very different, very focused level of solutions. Later today, immediately following this, you will listen to Professor Srinivas Chakravarti talking about his models of basal ganglia. This is an old slide, just to tell you that most of the researchers whom we are working with are very well established. They've been working in this domain for years and publishing a lot of content. So some of these content will be available. Most of these talks will be recorded and put online maybe in the near future. But in the process, please have a look at the papers that we publish. For example, Professor Srinivas Chakravarti and Professor other and colleagues have actually published a bunch of publications that relate normal and Parkinson's and other conditions related to basal ganglia. They have even looked at several multi-scale problems like molecular, cellular, system level interpretations of Parkinson's neurodegeneration during the condition, like we have done as well. If you look at specific questions that come from Professor Mohan Raghavan's lab in IIT Hyderabad, today you will listen about his platform, otherwise called the Neuroid, where he goes from ion channels all the way to biomechanics and starts talking about human locomotion. So this is an example of how we can take a problem that is complex and break it down to something smaller and address it in different phenomena. I'm not going to go into details of what you're going to listen to. I'm going to give you a small brief info of what we will be talking later. At AMRITA Mind Brain Center, we do a lot of different stuff. There are PIs and professors working on modeling neurons and circuits. We primarily focus on cerebellum and a little bit of cortex and thalamus. We also look at a very specific function of how to understand biochemical neurodegenerative disorders from biochemical system studies. So we model Parkinson's and Alzheimer's using first order or second order differential equations, and we look at what attributes to function. From these circuits, from these biorealistic circuits, we build models of brain circuits. Why do we build models of brain circuits? Because we do not know what these circuits do. So we built a very small cube with the University of Pavia. We've been working on how to build small but detailed
biophysically detailed rat cerebellar microcircuit. From these microcircuits, we try to put in what we see as individual inputs, and we try to get out what happens at the population behavior. And finally, what is also critical for us is how we interpret what is called BOLD, or blood oxygen level dependent signals, which are fMRI signals, fMRI related signals that we think can be reproduced also from individual neurons. And that's a big challenge because each neuron is not the contributor of a single BOLD signal. A BOLD signal is typically from a few tens or hundreds of millions of neurons, or let's say our models are not that complicated, that large level yet. So in brief, we ask the question, do we see, if I have a microcomputer in my lab, I call that the cerebellum, what is this microcomputer that is inside my head performing as a sensory perception device? We know a lot of functions, like a colleague of mine who works on visual and auditory signals will tell you that there are parts of the cerebellum that actually encode and decode certain characteristics of audio visual signals. And this is very, very critical. And this is where we think uh, we want to understand how the modular organization of cerebellum would answer questions that would be critical for future neuromorphic engineering. If you ask my more senior colleagues like Professor Gidio D'Angelo in Pavia, he'll tell you that the structure of cerebellum is a well-packed multi-layer architecture. And this is from his book and from some of our studies that we constantly keep on upgrading. And the picture that you see is from is from a book that he published with the Eddie Hermes, an Italian publisher. So we start asking the question, what is motor learning? And if motor learning is a function of cerebellum, so if I have precise motor function like moving my hand, what is that motor learning doing to us? And then in this network project, we are asking questions much more detailed than asking what a single part of this brain does. We are asking questions like, if there is a basal ganglia, for example, we believe that all the perceptual changes that we record today are attributed to aspects of cerebellum or aspects of basal ganglia, or combination of several circuits working together in I'm talking about motor function in this case. The prediction, the ability for a person to strike a ball into a football arena, or using a cricket bat to hit a four or a six, is probably a combined action of the cortex, the cerebellum, and basal ganglia working in concert. So we started asking questions like, which neurons of basal ganglia, which neurons of cerebellum attribute to which motor function. These are critical functions as well. And one of the last talks today will be from my colleague, Dr. Asha Vijayan. Asha has been working on understanding motor coordination by using a robotic device as a reverse engineered version of building a cerebellum model. So we started looking at Dan Walpert's idea of how cerebellum performs certain functions, and you will hear much more about it from the last talk of the day, where we talk about how a robotic articulation works, a cerebellum inspired spiking neural network. That'll be the last part of it, talking about it. We have some guest speakers as well from Center for National Research, or National Research Council, CNR in Palermo. um, the Palermo speakers, Professor Michele Migliore and Dr. Luca Leonardo Bologna, will be talking about a lot about what they do in terms of what is called e-brains and building models of computational neuroscience. That's just an example of what we can do. With this, I'll tell you that you are going to see or listen to a lot of online lectures. We will make the lectures available online, also on our YouTube channels in the future. But what you will see is that this is a small start to a massive project, otherwise called the MSBFIINE Multi-Scale Brain Function India-Italy Network of Excellence. We are not going to be limited by 2 countries or 2 labs or 6 labs or 8 labs. We welcome other partners to join us. Probably we can conduct more events with more other institutions across the country. And this will be part of it. While I conclude, thank you for your patient listening. While I conclude, most of what I do is reported from a big team of people here at AMRITA, the Mind Brain Center. We have just moved to a new location. I welcome all of you online to come in, drop in, just give us a note. We are based in the fishing village of Amritapuri. It's in the almost on the tip of India, right next to a place called Kollam. So if you come down, please come to the Kollam district, and ours is a fishing village in southern India. So with that, I thank you all, and we'll be taking inputs. My email is sham@amrita.edu. As we go, we'll have other speakers attend to the lecture, but you will be most welcome. And this is where I think we will be part of a very constant process. If you have ideas to share or advice for us, please feel free to email us or text us either at mindbrain@amrita.edu or directly contact me. If you Google Shyam Diwakar or Shyam@amrita.edu, you can reach me out. Thank you very much.